my blissful selves. Let us know in brief about establishment of peace in the society by morality. So every living being on the surface of the earth, they desire happiness. But one may be rich, the other may be poor. One may be a king, the other may be a servant. One may be a powerful person, the other may be a diseased person. But both are unhappy. Everyone wants the whole world as his property. But the world is one. So to whom the world belongs? Man thinks that the enjoyment of sensory objects gives us happiness. So there are quarrels, battles, wars, the world wars, for the sake of sensory objects. How to solve this problem? The saints and the sages brought into practice the moral rules by distributing the sensory objects and enjoying them. Usually, man thinks that some sensory objects give happiness and the other sensory objects give unhappiness. The sensory objects which we think give happiness are called liked sensory objects, and we dislike the other sensory objects that they give happiness, and they have been called as the disliked sensory objects. Then we desire the liked sensory objects. For example, sweet. So we like the sweet and we desire it. So when we desire the liked sensory object, so our mind becomes unsteady. And we don't experience happiness, but we experience unhappiness. The unhappiness has been experienced because our own self, which is of the nature of happiness, has not been reflected in the unsteady mind and experienced. Then later, we get the liked sensory object, that is the sweet. When we get the liked sensory object, the sweet, our mind becomes steady. When our mind becomes steady, the happiness of our own self has been reflected and experienced. In the same way, when we get the disliked sensory object, that is the pungent sensory object, then our mind becomes unsteady. And in that unsteady mind, the happiness of our own self has not been reflected and experienced. And when the pungent sensory object has been removed, our mind becomes steady. And in that steady mind, the happiness of our own self has been reflected and experienced. So, in this way, when the happiness has been experienced, so at that time the mind has become steady and the happiness of our own self has been reflected and experienced. So, in the steady mind, the happiness of our self has been reflected and experienced. But we think that it is of the sensory object. So, when we get the sweet, our mind becomes calm, steady. And in the calm mind, the happiness of our self is reflected and experienced. But we think that it is of the sweet. So the happiness that has been reflected and experienced is only for a moment. When we continue the enjoyment of the sweet, that results into weariness and tiresomeness. So by this we can come to know that the sensual enjoyment ends in weariness and tiresomeness. That means the happiness that has been experienced is not of the sensory objects, but it is of the self. And if the disliked sensory object, that is pungent sensory object, if we get the pungent sensory object, our mind becomes unsteady. And the happiness of our own self has not been reflected and experienced. Then, if we remove the pungent sensory object, then our mind becomes calm. And in that calm mind, the happiness of our own self has been reflected and experienced. But the ignorant man thinks that it is of the sensory object only. So by this we can clearly understand that when the mind is unsteady, unhappiness is experienced. And when the mind is steady, happiness is experienced. Whether the sensory object may be present or the sensory object may be not present. So, this is the case. For example, a mirror. And if the mirror is unsteady, and if the mirror is clean, so in that clean, steady mirror, the face of the gross body is reflected and seen. In the same way, the mind is the mirror which has been in a position to experience happiness or unhappiness. When our mind is calm and when our mind is clear, when our mind is calm and when it is clean, like that. That means when there are no likes and dislikes, and when there is no body consciousness, then the self which is of the nature of happiness has been reflected and experienced in the calm mind. So whatever may be the adjunct, it may be a sensory object, or it may be by drinking the intoxicants, or by deep sleep. So whatever the adjuncts may be there, but the happiness that has been experienced is of our own self only. So that is how we have to very calmly observe whether the happiness that has been experienced is of the sensory objects or our own real self. So, when our mind is unsteady, so the happiness of our own self has not been reflected and experienced. So, whatever the adjunct it may be yawning, or it may be by practicing the pranayama, like that, or a type of trance. So whatever the adjuncts there may be, but the happiness that has been experienced is of our own self only. So that is how the saints and the sages have been in a position to practice, or they have preached. Better you can distribute the sensory objects, whatever that you have, and enjoy them. So by distributing the sensory objects and enjoying them has been called the law of morality. And by observing the rules, moral rules, we can become happy. But the people, have been in a position to break the moral rules. So they have been in a position to, they are not observing the moral rules. They break the moral rules by the body, by the words, or by the thoughts. So if you preach the moral principles and if you involve in immoral action, what is the use of that preaching? All the preaching that you do is in faith. So if at all peace has to be established in the society, the people of the society have to observe the moral rules. So it is a must. So that is how the saints and sages have been in a position to distribute the land that we have, distribute the houses that we have, and distribute the cattle, the clothes, the ornaments of gold and silver, the money, and the respect. And if we strictly observe the moral rules, and even they have been in a position to distribute the men and women as husband and wife. So if we observe the moral rules, and if they have not been in a position to commit debauchery, that is immoral action, so there will be no love, there will be no faith, there will be no cooperation, and there will be no bliss, no happiness at all. So if at all we have to establish the peace in the society, so we have to observe the moral rules very strictly. We should not commit adultery. We should not involve in debauchery. We should not steal. We should not drink intoxicated drinks. And we should not hurt the living beings and kill them. And we should not speak the words lie. You should not talk lie like that. And if we very strictly observe the rules, so the life of the individuals that have been in the society will run very smoothly. And if we involve in immoral actions, debauchery and stealing, drinking the intoxicants, hurting and killing others, telling lies, commending others, so this leads unhappiness in the society. For example, if a particular person has committed immoral action, for example, a particular person has killed other person, what happens? If we do that type of immoral action, what happens? The mind who has killed the other person becomes unsteady. And there will be increase in the craziness. If he kills that person and the property that belongs to that person comes to this person who kills him, and he can eat anything, he can drink anything, and he can commit any type of immoral action, and this results in the increase of craziness. And not only that, a person who commits or he kills the other person, So the activities of his will not be in a position to run smoothly. So if at all the happiness has to be established in the society, we have to observe the moral rules very strictly. By observing the moral rules very strictly, there will be establishment of peace in the society, and there will be no other way. So today, by this, I end my talk.